The morning alarm rang through Research Station Alpha 7 just like any other day. Tae-woo Kim stretched in his small bunk and rubbed his tired eyes. He had been working late again, studying samples from the planet's strange purple forests. The coffee maker in his room made its familiar gurgling sound as he got dressed in his standard-issue jumpsuit. Tae-woo loved his job as the station's xenobiologist. Every day brought new discoveries on this alien world they called Kepler-4 for to be. The planet was home to dozens of different alien species, all living together in what the scientists called a fragile peace. Some days that peace felt more fragile than others. He walked down the metal corridors toward the main lab, nodding to the few early risers he passed. The station housed about 200 beings from 12 different species. Most of them got along well enough, but there were always tensions. Fear had a way of making everyone nervous. Morning, Tae-woo called Hannah Park from the command center. She was already at her desk, multiple screens showing data streams from around the station. Commander Park ran a tight ship, but she was fair. Her short black hair was pulled back in its usual neat style, and her brown eyes looked alert despite the early hour. Morning, Commander, Tae-woo replied. Anything interesting happen overnight? The usual, some minor squabbles in the living quarters, a small power fluctuation in Sector 7, and the Kandorian delegation is still complaining about the food. She paused and looked at him. Actually, there is something odd. The security sensors in the lower levels have been acting up. Tae-woo stopped walking. Acting up, how? False readings. Maybe the motion detectors keep triggering, but when security checks, there's nothing there. Bong-soo thinks it might be equipment failure. Security Chief Lee Bong-soo was a good man, but he saw threats everywhere. They came with the job, Tae-woo supposed. Still, false alarms in the lower levels seemed strange. Those areas were mostly storage and old equipment. Nothing should be moving down there. Want me to take a look? Tae-woo asked. Maybe it's some kind of small creature that got inside. Hannah nodded. That would be helpful. Take Nari with you. If there is some kind of animal down there, we might need medical support. Tae-woo found Dr. Nari Cho in the medical bay, checking inventory supplies. She was humming softly to herself, a habit she had when she was concentrating. Her gentle nature made her popular with patients from all species. Even the most nervous aliens seemed to calm down around her. Nari, want to go exploring? He asked. She looked up from her tablet. Exploring where lower levels. Security thinks there might be something moving around down there. Her eyes brightened. A new species. Maybe, or maybe just faulty sensors. They gathered basic equipment and headed for the lower levels. The elevator descended past the living quarters, past the main labs, past the industrial areas, down to the storage levels that most people forgot existed. The air down here felt different, cooler, quieter. The lower corridors were dimly lit by emergency lighting. Their footsteps echoed off the metal walls. Tae-woo carried a portable scanner while Nari had her medical kit and a powerful flashlight. It's creepy down here, Nari whispered. Just old storage, Tae-woo said, but he felt it too. Something was different about this place. They followed the corridor toward where the sensors had been triggering. The readings led them deeper into the storage area, past rooms filled with old equipment and supplies. The scanner in Tae-woo's hand began beeping softly. There, he said, pointing ahead. Something's definitely here. They approached a large cargo bay that was supposed to be empty. The heavy door was slightly open, which was strange. These doors were kept sealed for safety reasons. As they got closer, Tae-woo heard something that made him stop. Breathing. Deep, rhythmic breathing that was definitely not human. Nari, he whispered, stay behind me. He pushed the door open slowly and shined his light inside. What he saw made him gasp. The cargo bay had been transformed. Materials from around the storage area had been gathered into what looked like a nest. Old blankets, pieces of foam padding, strips of fabric, all arranged in a careful circle about 4 meters wide, and in the center of that nest was the largest creature Tae-woo had ever seen. It looked like a wolf, but a wolf the size of a small shuttle. Its fur seemed to be made of crystal that caught the light and threw it back in rainbow colors. As they watched, the colors shifted from deep blue to purple to silver. The creature's eyes were closed, and its massive sides rose and fell with each breath. Oh my, Nari breathed behind him. The creature was clearly pregnant. Her belly was swollen, and even in sleep, she seemed uncomfortable. Every few minutes, she would shift position with a soft whimper. Tae-woo's mind raced. He had studied alien biology for years, but this was beyond anything in his experience. The creature looked like it belonged to the Veltari species, but that was impossible. The Veltari had been extinct for centuries. Everyone knew that. We need to call this in, Nari said quietly. As if hearing her voice, the creature's eyes opened. They were large and intelligent, colored like liquid silver. For a moment, she just looked at them. Then her fur shifted to bright red, and she made a sound that was part growl, part roar, and part something else entirely. Tae-woo grabbed Nari's arm and pulled her back from the doorway. The creature didn't attack, but her message was clear. Stay away. They retreated to the corridor, hearts pounding. That was a Veltari wolf, Taewoo said in amazement. That's impossible, Nari replied. They're extinct, tell her that. They hurried back to the command center, where Hannah was still at her desk. Bong-soo had joined her, reviewing security reports. Commander Taewoo said breathlessly, "We found your motion detector problem." "What is it?" Bong-soo asked. "A pregnant Veltari wolf, about the size of a shuttle. She's made a nest in cargo bay 12. The room went silent. Hannah stared at him. Bong-soo's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon. "That's not possible," Hannah said finally. "It's there," Nari confirmed. "Very pregnant. Very large. Very real." Bong-soo was already moving toward the security station. "I'm calling full alert. We need to evacuate that section immediately." "Wait," Taewoo said. "She's not being aggressive. She's just protecting her nest. Veltari wolves killed thousands of beings before they went extinct," Bong-soo replied grimly. "Pregnant females are the most dangerous of all." Alarms began sounding throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed red in the corridors. Over the intercom, Hannah's voice announced that all personnel should avoid the lower levels until further notice, but Taewoo couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. The creature hadn't attacked them, even though she easily could have. She had looked afraid, and the way she had arranged her nest, so carefully, so thoughtfully. This wasn't a mindless predator. This was an intelligent being who needed help. "Commander," he said, "I think she came here on purpose." "What do you mean?" Hannah asked. "Think about it. How does a supposedly extinct creature end up in our storage bay? She didn't just wander in. She chose this place. Maybe she's looking for help." Bong shook his head. "Or maybe she's looking for prey. We need to neutralize this threat before someone gets hurt. She's about to give birth." Nari said quietly, "Whatever she is, wherever she came from, she's just a mother trying to protect her babies." The debate continued, but Taewoo was already forming a plan. If this creature really was a Veltari, then maybe his years of studying extinct alien languages hadn't been wasted time after all. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to communicate with her. The question was whether anyone would let him try. The emergency meeting room was crowded and tense. Representatives from all 12 species living on the station had gathered to discuss what everyone was calling the situation. Taewoo sat between Hannah and Nari, watching as fear spread through the room like a disease. The Condorians, with their blue-scaled skin and large eyes, huddled together in one corner. Their translator device clicked and hummed as they spoke in rapid, nervous bursts. The spider-like arachnids hung from the ceiling, their 8 legs tapping anxiously against the metal beams. But it was Junho Kong who surprised everyone. That most of Veltari researcher, normally calm and controlled, was visibly shaking. His reptilian features, usually so composed, showed raw terror. When he spoke, his voice came out in a series of clicks and hisses that his translator struggled to convert into words. "You do not understand," Junho said, his artificial voice sounding strange and mechanical. "My people tell stories. Old stories. Veltari wolves are not just predators. They are nightmare made real." Hannah leaned forward. "But your species is also called Veltari. Are you related?" "No," Junho replied quickly. "We share name only. Long ago, before space travel, the wolves ruled our homeworld. We lived in caves and trees, hiding from them. They could tear through stone with their claws. They hunted in packs that could destroy entire cities." Taewoo raised his hand. "But that was thousands of years ago. Maybe they've evolved. Maybe they're different now." The room erupted in nervous chatter. Several species began arguing at once. The universal translator system struggled to keep up with multiple languages being spoken simultaneously. "Different or not," Bong-soo said loudly, bringing quiet back to the room, "we have protocols for dangerous creatures. The safety of this station comes first." "What protocols?" asked Dr. Yoon Soyoung, the station's AI specialist. She was young, barely out of school, but her work with the computer systems made her voice important in discussions like this. Bong-soo's face was grim. "Containment first. If that fails, elimination." "You want to kill a pregnant mother?" Nuri asked, her voice sharp with anger. "I want to protect 200 lives," Bong-soo replied. Meanwhile, in cargo bay 12, the creature they were all discussing had made herself more comfortable. Security cameras showed her moving around her nest, arranging and rearranging the materials she had gathered. Her crystalline fur shifted colors constantly, blue, purple, silver, sometimes flashing red when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Soyoung had been monitoring the audio feeds from the cargo bay. "She's making sounds," she reported to the group. "Complex vocalizations. The computer is trying to analyze patterns." "What kind of sounds?" Taewoo asked. "Listen," Soyoung said, playing the recording through the room's speakers. The sounds that filled the room were unlike anything most of them had heard before. Deep, resonant calls that seemed to carry emotional weight. Sometimes they sounded like singing. Sometimes like conversation. Sometimes like crying. "She's talking to someone," Nari said quietly. "Who?" Bong-soo asked. "There's no one else down there. Maybe to her babies, Tae-woo suggested. She's pregnant. Maybe she's talking to them. Junho's translator clicked rapidly as he spoke. In the old stories, the wolves had their own language. They were smart. Smart, like us, but stronger. Much stronger. The meeting continued for 2 more hours, but no real decisions were made. The station remained on alert. The lower levels stayed sealed off. And in Cargo Bay 12, the pregnant wolf continued to wait. Over the next 3 days, a strange routine developed. Security teams took shifts monitoring the sealed-off area. Scientists analyzed data from sensors and cameras. The other species on the station grew more nervous with each passing hour. Many of the non-human residents began packing their belongings. The Kandorians requested immediate transport off the station. The arachnids moved their entire community to the upper levels, as far from the cargo bay as possible. We're losing people, Hannah told Tae-woo during one of their daily briefings. 3 ships left yesterday. 2 more are scheduled to depart tomorrow. They're scared, Tae-woo said. Can you blame them? We have a creature down there that could probably tear through the station's hull if it wanted to, but it doesn't want to. That's what I keep trying to tell everyone. Tae-woo had been spending most of his time studying the security footage and audio recordings. The wolf's behavior patterns were becoming clearer to him. She wasn't pacing like a caged animal. She wasn't trying to break out of the cargo bay. She was building, organizing, preparing. Look at this, he said, showing Hannah footage from the previous night. See how she arranges those fabric pieces. That's not random. She's creating different areas in her nest. A sleeping area, a feeding area, a place for her babies. You're anthropomorphizing, Hannah replied, seeing human behavior in an alien creature. No, I'm seeing intelligent behavior. There's a difference. Soyoung had been working around the clock to analyze the wolf's vocalizations. Her computer programs were slowly finding patterns in the sounds. I think she's repeating certain phrases, she told Tae-woo, like she's practicing or rehearsing something. Can you isolate the repeated sections? Already done. Soyoung played a sequence of sounds that clearly repeated throughout the recordings. This one comes up most often. Tae-woo listened carefully. The sounds were musical, almost like a lullaby. She's singing to her babies. That's what I thought. 2. The breakthrough came on the 4th day. Tae-woo was in the lab, comparing the wolf's vocalizations to ancient Veltari language fragments in the station's database. Most xenobiologists ignored the old languages, considering them dead and useless. But Tae-woo had always been fascinated by how extinct species communicated. Soyoung, he called excitedly. Come look at this. She hurried over to his workstation. On the screen were 2 audio wave patterns. One was from the wolf's recordings. The other was from a fragment of ancient Veltari poetry found on archaeological sites. They match, Soyoung breathed. Not exactly, but close enough. She's not just making random sounds. She's speaking. This is language. They worked together for hours, comparing more recordings to database fragments. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. The wolf was using an ancient form of Veltari language, but with modifications. Some sounds were different. Some patterns were new. It's like she's speaking an evolved version of the old language. Tae-woo explained to Hannah and the others during their evening briefing. So you can understand her, Bong-soo asked. Not yet, but I'm starting to recognize individual words, and I think I know what she's been repeating most often. With her name, she's been saying her name over and over, like she's trying to tell us who she is. The room fell silent. Even Bong-soo looked thoughtful. What is her name? Nari asked softly. Tae-woo looked at his notes. As close as I can translate it, her name is Sylvan. It means something like silver moon in the old language. That night, while the station slept, Sylvan continued her vigil in Cargo Bay 12. Her labor pains were getting stronger and more frequent. She moved restlessly around her nest, calling out softly in her ancient language. But now, thanks to Tae-woo's work, the computer systems could provide rough translations of her words. She wasn't just calling random sounds into the darkness, she was calling for help. The transport ship arrived early in the morning, bringing with it the one person Tae-woo had been waiting for. Dae-hyun Shin was 77 years old, with more gray hair than black and hands that shook slightly from age. But his mind was as sharp as ever, and he knew more about alien languages than anyone in the galaxy. Professor Shin, Tae-woo said as the old man stepped off the transport. Thank you for coming. Your message was very interesting. Young man Dae-hyun replied, his voice carrying the authority of decades of experience. A living Veltari wolf speaking ancient languages. I had to see this for myself. They walked quickly through the station corridors. Word of the professor's arrival had spread, and many residents watched from doorways as they passed. Some looked hopeful. Others looked more frightened than before. In the command center, Hannah briefed the professor on everything that had happened. Dae-hyun listened carefully, asking questions and taking notes in his old-fashioned paper notebook. Show me the recordings, he said finally. Soyoung played the audio files they had collected over the past week. Sylvan's vocalizations filled the room. The professor closed his eyes and listened, sometimes asking Soyoung to replay certain sections. Remarkable, he said, after an hour of listening. This is definitely based on ancient Veltori, but it's changed, evolved, like a language that's been growing for thousands of years without outside contact. Can you understand it? Tae-woo asked. Some of it. The basic structure is familiar, but many of the sounds are new to me. He paused and looked at the group. However, I think your translation of her name is close but not complete. What do you mean? Daehaeon played one of Sylvan's most common vocalizations again. You translated this as Sylvan, meaning silver moon. But there are additional tonal elements you missed. The full name is Sylvan Aramoth. What does that mean? Nari asked. Silver moon, who protects. It's not just a name. It's a title. She's telling us what she is. The implications hit everyone at once. This wasn't just any Veltari wolf. This was someone important. Someone with a role in her society. Professor Tae-woo said excitedly. I've been working on some of the other patterns we've recorded. Can you help me with these? They spent the next several hours working together. The professor's knowledge of ancient grammar combined with Tae-woo's careful analysis of the sound patterns began to unlock more of Sylvan's communications. This section here, Daehaeon said, pointing to a wave pattern on Soyoung's computer screen. She keeps repeating this phrase. In Old Veltari, it would mean something like small ones who come or little ones arriving. She's talking about her babies. Nari said softly. Yes, but there's more. Listen to this part. He played another section. This is harder to translate, but I think she's saying the names of her unborn cubs. The room fell silent. The idea that Sylvan was not only intelligent but was already naming her unborn children made her seem less like a dangerous creature and more like any expecting mother. Young Mi-ru, the station's youngest engineer, had been quietly working on a project of her own. She approached the group hesitantly. Excuse me, but I've been thinking about the communication problem. What do you mean? Hannah asked. Well, we can understand some of what she's saying, but she can't understand us. Maybe we need a way to talk back to her. Young Mi had been modifying a standard translation device, adjusting its audio output to match the tonal frequencies of Sylvan's language. It's not perfect, but it might let us speak basic words in her language. Tae-woo looked at the device with excitement. Professor, do you think this could work? Daehaeon examined the equipment carefully. The theory is sound. But who would be brave enough to test it? Before anyone could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed red in the corridors. Over the intercom system, a security officer's voice crackled with urgency. Medical emergency in Cargo Bay 12. The creature appears to be in distress. They rushed to the security station where multiple screens showed feeds from the cargo bay. Sylvan was moving restlessly around her nest, her crystalline fur flashing between red and deep purple. Her vocalizations had changed too, becoming more urgent and pained. She's in labor, Nari said immediately. Those are labor pains. How can you tell? Bong-soo asked. I've delivered babies from 6 different species. Pain looks the same everywhere. On the screens, they could see Sylvan trying different positions, clearly uncomfortable. Her calls were becoming more frequent and more desperate. She needs help, Nari said. Absolutely not, Bong-soo replied firmly. No one goes near that creature, especially not when she's in pain and stressed. But she could die, Nari protested. Her babies could die. The argument that followed was loud and heated. Bong-soo insisted that safety protocols meant no one could approach Sylvan. Nari argued that their duty as medical professionals meant they had to help. Hannah tried to find a middle ground that satisfied everyone. Meanwhile, Tae-woo was studying the audio feeds from the cargo bay. Sylvan's vocalizations were different now, more urgent, more specific. Professor, he said quietly, pulling Daehaeon aside. Listen to this. She's not just making pain sounds. She's saying something. They listened carefully to the latest recordings. Daehaeon's face grew thoughtful, then concerned. What is it? Tae-woo asked. If I'm translating this correctly, she's calling for help. But not just any help. She's calling for what the old texts would describe as wise ones who heal. Medical help. More than that, in Veltari culture, birth was a community event. The whole pack would help protect and assist. She's calling for her pack, but her pack isn't here? The realization hit Tae-woo like a physical blow. She's alone. She came here because she's alone and she needs help with the birth. That would be my interpretation. Yes. Tae-woo looked at the screens, showing Sylvan in obvious distress. He thought about everything they had learned. She had chosen their station as a safe place to give birth. She had built her nest carefully, and patiently she had tried to communicate with them, and now she was calling for help in the ancient language of her people. I have to try, he said quietly. Try what? Hannah asked, overhearing. I have to try to communicate with her. To help her? Absolutely not, Bong-soo said immediately. She's asking for help, Tae-woo replied. In her own language, she's asking for healers. For wise ones. She's not a monster, she's just a mother who needs help. The debate continued, but Tae-woo had already made up his mind. While the others argued about protocols and safety, he was thinking about Young Mi's translation device and Professor Shin's language lessons. somewhere in the lower levels of the station. Sylvan continued to call out in her ancient language, hoping someone would understand and help her bring her children safely into the world. Taewoo stood outside Cargo Bay 12, with his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. In his hands, he carried Young Mi's modified translation device, a basic medical kit that Nari had prepared, and a small tablet showing Professor Shin's notes on Veltori pronunciation. "This is insane," Bongsu said through the radio. "I'm ordering you to step back." "I can't do that," Taewoo replied quietly. "She's calling for help and I'm the only one who can understand her." Through the slightly open door, he could hear Sylvan's distressed calls. Her labor pains were getting stronger and more frequent. The sounds she made were heartbreaking, filled with pain and loneliness. "Taewoo," Hannah's voice came through the radio. "You don't have to do this. We can find another way." "What other way?" "She's been alone down here for a week. She came to us for help, and we've done nothing but argue about it." Professor Shin's voice joined the conversation. "Remember what we practiced. Speak slowly and clearly. Use the deep tones for respect. And whatever you do, don't make any sudden movements." Taewoo took a deep breath and pushed the door open wider. The cargo bay was dimly lit, but he could see Sylvan clearly. She was even more magnificent. Up close, her crystalline fur caught what little light there was and threw it back in shimmering patterns. She was lying on her side in her carefully built nest, her massive body trembling with labor pains. When she heard the door open, her head turned toward him, her silver eyes fixed on his face, and her fur immediately shifted to bright red. The color of danger, the color of warning. Tae stopped walking. He was still about 50 meters away, well outside what everyone considered the danger zone. But even from this distance, he could see how powerful she was. Her claws alone were longer than his hand. "Hello, Sylvan Aramoth," he said, activating the translation device. The machine converted his words into the ancient Veltari language, producing deep, musical tones that echoed through the cargo bay. Sylvan's reaction was immediate. Her fur shifted from red to purple, then to blue. The color of confusion, of curiosity. "I am Taewoo," he continued, speaking slowly as Professor Shin had taught him. "I am here to help." The word help in Veltari was complex, involving several tonal changes that the device struggled to reproduce correctly, but Sylvan seemed to understand. Her fur shifted to a lighter blue, and she made a soft sound that the tablet translated as a question. "You called for healers," Taewoo said. "For wise ones. I am not wise, but I want to help you and your little ones." Another labor pain hit Sylvan, and she cried out. The sound was so full of pain that Taewoo instinctively took a step forward. Immediately, her fur flashed red again, and she bared teeth that were each as long as a knife. "I know you're scared," Taewoo said, stopping where he was. "I'm scared too, but your babies are coming, and you need help." For several minutes, they stayed like that, Taewoo standing still, speaking softly in her ancient language. Sylvan, watching him, her fur cycling through different colors as emotions and labor pains washed over her. "She's listening to you," Professor Shin's voice whispered through the radio. "Keep talking. Let her get used to your voice." Taewoo began, telling her about himself, about how he studied alien life because he found it beautiful and fascinating, about how he had learned her language because he believed all species had something important to say, about how he had spent his whole life wanting to help creatures that others feared. As he spoke, Sylvan's fur gradually shifted from red to purple to blue. Her silver eyes never left his face, but the tension in her massive body began to ease slightly. Another contraction hit her, stronger than before. She cried out and shifted position, clearly struggling. Taewoo could see that something was wrong. The labor was too difficult, too painful. "Nari," he said into his radio, "I think there are complications." "What kind of complications?" Nara's voice was tight with concern. "I don't know, but she's in too much pain. This isn't normal. Can you get closer to see what's happening?" Taewoo looked at Sylvan, who was panting heavily between contractions. Her fur was now shifting rapidly between blue and purple, showing her confusion and pain. "I'm going to try," he said. "Absolutely not." Bongsu's voice cut in. "You're already too close." "She needs help," Taewoo replied firmly. "And I'm the only one here who can give it to her." He took a slow step forward. Sylvan's head came up. Immediately, her fur flashing red. Vawini stopped and spoke to her again, explaining what he was doing. The red faded back to purple. "That's right," he said gently. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." Step by step, he moved closer. Each time Sylvan showed signs of aggression, he would stop and talk to her until she calmed down. The translation device worked imperfectly, but somehow she seemed to understand his intentions, if not always his words. When he reached the 30-meter mark, she stood up in her nest, towering over him even at this distance. Her fur was bright red, and she made a sound that needed no translation. It was a warning. Taewoo knelt down, making himself as small and non-threatening as possible. "I know you're scared," he said, "but I've helped other mothers before. Different species, but babies are babies. Please let me help you. For a long moment, they stared at each other. A human and an alien wolf, separated by evolution and space, and 1,000 fears. Then another contraction hit Sylvan, and she cried out in pain that transcended all species barriers. Please, Taewoo said, and the translation device gave the word extra emotional weight in the ancient language. Please let me help you. Sylvan looked at him for what felt like forever. Her fur shifted through several colors before finally settling on light blue. Not trust, but not rejection either. Cautious acceptance. She lay back down in her nest and made a soft sound that might have been permission. Very slowly, Taewoo stood up and took another step forward. Then another. Sylvan watched him but didn't move. Her fur stayed blue, cycling occasionally to purple when contractions hit her. At 20 meters. He could see her clearly enough to understand the problem. The labor had been going on too long. She was exhausted and dehydrated. Without help, both she and her babies might not survive. Nari, he said quietly, into his radio. Talk me through what I need to do. Taewoo knelt at the edge of Sylvan's nest, close enough now to see the exhaustion in her silver eyes. Her crystalline fur was damp with sweat, and her breathing was labored. She had been in active labor for hours, and her strength was fading. Okay, Taewoo Nara's voice came through his radio. Calm and professional. First, I need you to assess her condition. Can you see any obvious problems? Taewoo carefully examined what he could see without getting too close. She's very tired. Her breathing is shallow, and I think one of the babies might be positioned wrong. How can you tell? The contractions are strong, but nothing's happening. In human births, that usually means the baby is stuck. Sylvan made a soft whimpering sound, and Taewoo turned to look at her face. Her eyes were focused on him with an intensity that was both frightening and heartbreaking. She's trusting me, he said quietly into the radio. I can see it in her eyes. She's scared, but she's trusting me to help her. Then let's not let her down, Nari replied. You need to get closer. Close enough to actually help. Taewoo spoke to Sylvan in her ancient language, explaining what he needed to do. The translation device converted his words into the deep, musical tones of Veltari speech. He told her that he was going to move closer, that he needed to help her babies be born safely. Sylvan listened, her fur shifting from blue to purple and back again. When another contraction hit her, she cried out in pain, and Taewoo saw her decision in her eyes. She was going to let him help. Moving very slowly, Taewoo crawled into the nest. The materials Sylvan had gathered were softer than they looked, arranged in careful layers that would provide comfort and warmth for newborns. She had prepared everything perfectly, except for the one thing she couldn't control, the difficulty of the birth itself. I'm here, he said softly, placing one hand gently on her side. Her fur was warm and surprisingly soft, despite its crystalline appearance. I'm going to help you. Under Nara's guidance, Taewoo began to assist with the birth. It was unlike anything he had ever done before. Sylvan's anatomy was similar to Earthwolves in some ways, but different in others. Her babies were larger than expected, and the first one was indeed positioned incorrectly. You need to help guide the baby, Nari instructed, very gently. Don't force anything. Working carefully, Taewoo helped reposition the first cub. Sylvan tensed at his touch but didn't pull away. Instead, she made soft sounds that Professor Shin later translated as words of encouragement and gratitude. When the first cub finally emerged, Taewoo gasped in amazement. It was about the size of a large dog, with the same crystalline fur as its mother. Its tiny body was perfect, and when it took its first breath, it made a sound like tiny bells ringing. It's beautiful, Taewoo whispered. Sylvan immediately began cleaning her first baby, her exhaustion forgotten in the joy of motherhood. Her fur had shifted to bright gold, a color they hadn't seen before. Professor Shin's voice crackled through the radio, translating her soft vocalizations. She's saying the first name. The first cub's name. What is it? Taewoo asked. Taewon. She's calling the cub Von Taewoo felt tears spring to his eyes. She had named her first baby after him, after the human who had helped bring it into the world. But there was no time to be emotional. The second cub was coming, and this birth was easier now that I had opened the way. Working together, Taewoo and Sylvan welcomed the second baby into the world. This cub was slightly smaller than the first, with fur that shimmered between silver and blue. Sylvan cleaned it lovingly, while making sounds that Professor Shin translated as the second name, Nursel. The professor said, after Nari, she's naming this one after our doctor. The third and final cub took the longest to arrive. Sylvan was exhausted, and this baby seemed reluctant to leave the safety of the womb. But with patience and gentle encouragement, Taewoo helped guide the last cub into the world. This one was the largest of the three, with fur that gleamed like polished metal. It took several seconds to take its first breath, and Taewoo was starting to worry when it finally cried out in a voice that was stronger than its siblings. Hanara, Professor Shin, translated as Sylvan spoke the third name. After Commander, Hannah, as the three cubs nursed for the first time, Sylvan looked at Taewoo with eyes full of gratitude. She made a long, complex sound that the translation device struggled with, but Professor Shin's voice came through the radio with the meaning. She's performing a naming ceremony. In Veltari culture, naming cubs is sacred. By including parts of your names in her children's names, she's making you family. You're part of her pack now. Taewoo sat in the nest, surrounded by a mother and her three newborn cubs, and felt a connection that went beyond species, beyond fear, beyond everything that had kept them apart. He had helped bring new life into the world, and in doing so, had built a bridge between two species that had been separated by centuries of misunderstanding. Sylvan Aramoth, he said softly, speaking her full name with all the respect he could manage. She looked at him and made a sound that needed no translation. It was the sound of gratitude, of trust, of a mother acknowledging the one who had helped save her children. In the command center, everyone who had been watching the feeds sat in stunned silence. They had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history, not just the birth of Veltari cubs, but the birth of a new relationship between species. "Get me a communication channel to the Veltari homeworld," Hannah said quietly. "I think we need to make some calls." 5 years later, Taewoo stood on the observation deck of the exploration ship New Horizon, watching 3 young Veltari wolves play in the ship's recreation area. Tyvin, Nursel, and Hanara had grown into magnificent creatures, each now the size of a small shuttle like their mother, but with personalities that reflected both their Veltari heritage and their unique upbringing among humans. "Uncle Taewoo," Tyvin called, using the human word he had learned for the man who had helped bring him into the world. His crystalline fur shimmered blue with excitement as he bounded over. "Look what we found." The young wolf carefully placed a strange crystal formation at Taewoo's feet. It was unlike anything in the ship's geological database, with internal structures that seemed to pulse with their own light. "Very interesting," Taewoo said, kneeling down to examine the crystal more closely. "Where did you find this?" "On the moon we just surveyed," Hanara replied, joining her brother. Her fur was now a deep gold color, inherited from her mother's emotional spectrum. "There are thousands of them in the underground caves." "Millions," Nursel added, approaching more quietly than her siblings. She had always been the thoughtful one, with silver fur that reminded everyone of Sylvan. "The whole moon is full of..." Taewoo smiled as he studied the crystal. The 3 cubs had become invaluable members of the exploration team. Their enhanced senses could detect things that human instruments missed, and their natural intelligence had only grown with education and exposure to multiple species. "We should show this to the geology team," he said. "This could be important." "Already did," Tyvin replied proudly. "Dr. Martinez says it might be a new form of energy storage. The preliminary tests are very promising." As the cubs ran off to continue their games, Taewoo reflected on how much had changed since that day in Cargo Bay 12. The discovery of living Veltari wolves had revolutionized galactic politics and science. What had started as a crisis had become the foundation for a new era of interspecies cooperation. The first change had come quickly. Within weeks of the cubs' birth, representatives from the Veltari homeworld had arrived at the station. Had been amazed to learn that their ancient legends were real, that the great wolves of their mythology still existed somewhere in the galaxy, but the real surprise had come when Sylvan finally felt safe enough to tell her full story. She wasn't just any Veltari wolf. She was a guardian, one of the last of her kind, tasked with protecting ancient knowledge and wisdom. Her species hadn't gone extinct, they had gone into hiding, waiting for the galaxy to become wise enough to accept them. The birth of her cubs on a multi-species station, with help from humans, had been a sign that the time of hiding was over. "Taewoo," a familiar voice called from behind him. He turned to see Sylvan approaching, her massive form moving with the grace that only came with complete comfort in her fur was a peaceful blue-green, the color she showed when she was content and happy. "Hello, Sylvan Aramoth," he said, using her full name as he always did. Over the years, their communication had improved dramatically. The translation devices were better now, and both species had learned to understand each other's languages more naturally. "The cubs found something interesting," she said, settling down beside him. "They are excited about the crystal formations. They're growing up to be excellent explorers," Taewoo replied. "You should be proud. But I am most proud that they grow up without fear, without hiding." Sylvan had become the first Veltari ambassador to the galactic community. Her wisdom and patient nature had helped overcome centuries of fear and misunderstanding. Other Veltari had slowly emerged from hiding, sharing their knowledge of ancient technologies and forgotten sciences. The benefits to galactic civilization had been enormous. Veltari understanding of crystal technology had revolutionized energy storage and faster-than-light communication. Their knowledge of biology had led to medical breakthroughs that helped dozens of species. Most importantly, their philosophy of cooperation and mutual protection had begun to influence how different species worked together. "Any word from the homeworld?" Taewoo asked. "Good news," Sylvan replied, her fur shifting to bright gold with Pleasure. The Council has approved the expansion of the exchange program. 20 more families will be sending their cubs to live and learn, among other species. The exchange program had been Sylvan's idea. Young Veltari would spend part of their education living with other species, learning their languages and cultures. In return, young beings from other species could visit Veltari worlds to learn their ancient wisdom. Tyvan, Nersil, and Inara had been the first exchange students, and their success had proven the value of the program. They were fully comfortable with humans, but they also maintained their Veltari identity and values. Speaking of the exchange program, Taewoo said, I got a message from Nari yesterday. She's finally finished her medical residency on the Veltari homeworld. Dr. Nari has learned much, Sylvan said approvingly. She will be a great healer, combining human and Veltari medical knowledge. Nari had been one of the first humans to join the exchange program, spending 3 years learning Veltari healing techniques. Hannah had followed her, studying leadership and conflict resolution methods. Even Bong Su had eventually joined a cultural exchange, learning Veltari security practices that emphasized protection rather than aggression. The galaxy is changing, Taewoo said, watching the cubs play with other young beings from the exploration team. There were human children, young Kandorians, baby arachnids, and others, all playing together without fear or prejudice. Yes, Sylvan agreed. It is becoming what it should have been long ago, a place where different kinds of life can work together. As they talked, Professor Shin approached them. The old linguist was now in his 80s, but he remained active as the head of the new Interspecies Communication Institute. Sylvan Taewoo, he said with a smile, I have news from the Institute. We've just established successful communication with the crystalline beings of Rigel 7. They're interested in joining the galactic community. Another species emerging from isolation, Sylvan observed. The pattern continues. It was true. Since the Veltari had revealed themselves, dozens of other species had come forward. Many had been hiding, like the Veltari, waiting for the galaxy to become a safer place. Others had simply been too afraid to make contact. The success of the Veltari integration had given them hope. What did we learn about them? Taewoo asked. They're silicon-based, highly intelligent, and they've been watching us for centuries. They say they decided to make contact because they observed how we treated the Veltari. They want to see if the same cooperation is possible with their species. Taewoo felt the familiar excitement that came with each new first contact. Each species brought new knowledge, new perspectives, new ways of solving old problems. I'd like to be part of the contact team, he said. I thought you might, Professor Shin replied with a knowing smile. You've become our best first contact specialist. As the old professor walked away, Sylvan made a sound that Taewoo had learned to recognize as laughter. What's funny? He asked. You little human. 5 years ago, you were afraid to approach one pregnant wolf. Now you want to talk to crystal beings you've never met. I had a good teacher, Taewoo replied. You taught me that understanding is always better than fear. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the next generation play and learn together. The cubs had gathered the crystal formation they'd found and were showing it to their friends, explaining its properties with the patient teaching style they'd learned from both human and Veltari mentors. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to our station that day, Taewoo said. Nothing good, Sylvan replied. My cubs would have been born in hiding, in fear. They would have grown up believing that other species were enemies to be avoided. And we would have missed the chance to learn from your people. Yes, but you did not turn away when I needed help. You chose understanding over fear. That choice changed everything. As if sensing their conversation, Tyvan looked up from his group of friends and called out, Uncle Taewoo, will you tell us the story again? Which story? Taewoo called back, though he already knew the answer. The story of how you and Mother met, how you learned to talk to each other. It was their favorite story, one they never tired of hearing. Taewoo looked at Sylvan, who made the sound that meant yes please. All right, he said, standing up. Gather around, everyone. As children from a dozen different species settled in a circle around him, Taewoo began the story that had become legend throughout the galaxy. Story of how a frightened human knelt before a dangerous alien predator and spoke her name. The story of how understanding triumphed over fear, and how one act of courage opened the door to a new era of galactic cooperation. It was a story worth telling, because it reminded everyone that the greatest discoveries came not from conquering the unknown, but from having the courage to reach out and try to understand it. And in the years to come, as the galaxy continued to grow and change, that story would inspire countless others to choose understanding over fear, cooperation over conflict, and hope over despair.